Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. In the previous episode, Jack and Tutien's story had gradually revealed pressures that were not easy to see from the outside. Not obvious crises, not sudden shocks in a single moment, but silent pressures, accumulating day by day, little by little, work piling up, payments constantly reaching their deadlines, relentless calls, leaving Jack with almost no time to breathe, no real moment of rest. Meanwhile, Tien stayed by his side, not saying much, not adding more pressure, just quietly, saving every small amount of money, doing what she could to help him hold on to what was slowly becoming fragile. But what they had gone through, the pressures they had faced, were still not the end, still not the worst part, because, as we move into this episode, everything no longer stays within controllable pressure, no longer difficulties that can be handled step by step, but begins to move beyond control, in a very clear way. That morning, everything seemed to begin like any other day. Jack arrived at the company, carrying thoughts unresolved from the day before, numbers still incomplete, plans still unfinished, worries still lingering. But the moment he stepped in, he realized the atmosphere was not the same. No familiar business. No sounds of work discussions. No short conversations. Instead, there was a silence, not normal, a silence filled with heaviness. The looks from others were no longer the same, no longer ordinary, but filled with concern, with hesitation, and things unspoken, yet clearly felt. Jack paused, just for a brief moment, but enough to understand. Something had happened, or was about to happen. Then, an employee rushed over, no longer calm as usual. Voice hurried, without time to think. "Jack, the investors are here. They're in the meeting room." A sentence, short, but enough to make everything stop. Jack froze, just for a second. But in that second, so many thoughts rushed through. He understood. This was something that sooner or later would happen. Not unexpected, but something he had always wanted to delay, to buy more time, to prepare better, to find a solution. But he did not expect it would come this quickly, so fast, that it left him no space, no time to organize, no chance to turn things around. Jack walked, not fast, but not slow either. Each step felt heavier as he approached the meeting room. Even without opening the door, he could already feel the atmosphere inside was different. The door opened. The room was not large, yet felt suffocating, not because of the number of people, but because of the pressure filling the space. The people sitting there were no longer the familiar faces with their previous softness, no longer supportive words, no longer flexibility in their way of speaking. Instead, there was firmness, clarity, and no room to step back. Every gaze turned toward Jack, without words, yet clearly expressing. This time, things were no longer the same. The meeting began. No small talk, no gentle opening, straight to the point. Numbers were repeated, deadlines were laid out, previous commitments, one by one, placed on the table, nothing missing, nothing overlooked. And then, the demand was made, clear, decisive. Jack had to return the investment within a short time. No extensions, no more opportunities, no negotiation. Because, from their perspective, what had happened over time had gone beyond what they could accept. Not once, not a minor mistake, but delays, repeated, prolonged, and no longer enough trust to keep waiting. Jack tried to explain, not to justify, but to ask for time, a small chance to turn things around. He spoke, slowly, clearly, one point at a time. But his words no longer had the same effect, no longer made them reconsider, no longer softened the atmosphere. They simply fell into silence, with no response, no change. This time, no one wanted to listen, no one wanted to prolong, no one wanted to wait. And then, one of them stood up, not rushed, but firm, his expression unchanged, his voice not loud, but clear. Every word. If today there is no clear solution, we will proceed legally. That sentence was not a threat, not just pressure, but a real warning. A boundary had been set. No more room to step back. No middle ground. No easy path left. The room fell silent. No one spoke. No one reacted immediately. But everyone understood. Everything had reached a point that could not return. Jack stood there, saying nothing, not arguing, not trying to delay further, because he understood. At this moment, words no longer had the power to change anything. He walked out of the meeting room. The door closed behind him. A very small sound, yet it felt like everything had been cut off. Outside, nothing had changed, but the feeling was completely different. His mind was empty. No clear thoughts, no concrete plans, just a heavy void. He had imagined many situations, prepared for the worst, but still did not expect everything would be pushed this far, so quickly, so clearly, with no way back, before things even had time to settle, before Jack could organize his tangled thoughts. Another incident came crashing in, without warning, giving him no time at all to adapt. Everything continued to be pushed forward, in a direction he could no longer control. The construction site, where he had invested so much time, so much effort, so much hope, began to slow down, not stopping all at once, but little by little. The first signs became clear. Workers were no longer showing up as before, no longer full, no longer steady. Group after group quietly left, without long explanations, without complicated reasons, just simply walking away, because they understood what was happening was no longer secure, no longer certain, no longer a place they could continue to rely on. Materials were no longer being supplied. Deliveries stopped coming. Orders were not confirmed. Piece by piece, everything was cut off. What Jack had tried to hold together for so long, what he had struggled to maintain, to keep from collapsing, was now beginning to break apart, not in a single moment, but in fragments, section by section, slow, but undeniable, impossible to stop. That afternoon, as the light softened, as everything outside still seemed normal, elsewhere, words began to spread, without official sources, without confirmation, just stories passed from one person to another, yet carrying immense weight. Jack's company is in trouble. They can't pay anymore. They might go bankrupt. Those words had no concrete proof, no formal documents, but spread rapidly, so fast, that no one could control them, no one could stop them. They didn't have to be completely true, just partly real, was enough to make everything worse. At home, Tien didn't know everything yet, no clear information, no one telling her directly, but she could feel something was changing. The atmosphere was no longer light, no longer normal, but slowly becoming heavier. In every moment, in every thought, a feeling, unclear, but impossible to ignore, until late that afternoon, when everything seemed to quiet down, when the last light of the day was fading. A car stopped at the gate, not a familiar sight, not family, not a partner, not anyone she had seen. Procedure. Yet that very calmness made the atmosphere heavier than ever. No noise, no resistance, but a feeling of no escape.
Tự tiên stood still.
Not stepping forward, not saying anything. Her hands clenched tightly, as if trying to hold on to something, slipping away. She didn't cry, didn't break down, but her eyes had turned red. At some point, no one noticed. Jack turned to look at her, said nothing.
No explanation, no promises.
Just a slight nod, a very small gesture, yet carrying so much. Like reassurance, like a way of saying he was still okay, that everything was not the end. But deep inside, both of them understood. From that moment, everything had entered a completely different stage. No longer difficulties they could manage, no longer pressures they could delay, but a reality that could not be avoided. The gate closed, the sound not loud, but very clear. The car slowly drove away, not rushing, but not stopping, taking Jack away from the familiar place, away from what he had tried so hard to hold on to.
Tự tiên stood alone.
In the yard, no one beside her, no sound, no movement. The space suddenly felt empty. What she feared, what she had always worried about, had finally happened. No longer just thoughts, no longer assumptions, but reality, very clear, very close. Yet, she did not collapse, did not let herself fall apart. At that moment, she turned back into the house, slowly, but firmly, looking at everything, every familiar corner, every object. Nothing had changed, but the feeling was completely different. She sat down, for a long time, doing nothing, saying nothing, just silence. That night, there was no meal,
No conversation, no familiar routine.
only silence, stretching, covering the entire space. But within that silence, it was not giving up, not an ending, but something beginning to form. A thought, a decision, not yet clear, but certain. It would change everything. That was happening. The next morning, when the light had not yet fully spread across the space, when everything was still immersed in the familiar quiet of a new day beginning, Tien was already awake, earlier than any day before. Not because she couldn't sleep, but because she no longer allowed herself to hesitate, no longer allowed herself to stand still for even a second. The house remained the same. Everything was in its place. Nothing had changed, but the feeling was completely different. No longer the familiar peace, but an invisible pressure, weighing down on every thought, on every action. She didn't go to the market like usual, didn't prepare goods, didn't carry the familiar things. Instead, she began doing something else, something she had never imagined. She would have to do this way. She gathered everything she had, nothing left out, nothing overlooked. Every bit of savings, carefully kept before, every item, preserved over time, anything that could be sold, anything that could be converted, everything was brought out. No holding back,
No hesitation.
no more thinking about whether to save something for later, because she understood very clearly, at this moment, it was not the time to regret, not the time to plan far ahead, but the time to hold on to what mattered most, not what was in her hands, but the person who needed her. Ahead, every action became more decisive, no longer slow like before.
No pauses.
Just doing, clearly, and without turning back. On the other side, the space was completely different. No longer the familiar home, no longer quiet, but a place, closed, tense, with no room for emotion. Jack sat in the working room, not his usual position, not a place where he had control, but a place where he had to face question after question, continuously, no break, no time to think for long. Documents were placed in front of him. Numbers, amounts, transactions were repeated in detail, clearly. No one concluded anything yet. No one stated the final outcome, but that made the pressure grow little by little, heavier, harder to breathe. There were moments Jack stayed silent, not because he had no answers, not because he wanted to avoid, but because he was trying to hold on, to keep himself from losing control, to keep his thoughts from becoming chaotic, to keep his words from going in the wrong direction, because he understood just one mistake, just one uncontrolled sentence, everything could become worse, much worse. At that moment, his mind was no longer about work, no longer about numbers, no longer about unfinished plans, but only one thing remained, very clearly. Tutien. Her image appeared clearly amid all the pressure. He knew, outside, she was alone, with no one beside her, no one to share with, yet still trying, still doing everything she could. For him, just thinking about that was enough for him not to fall. By the afternoon, as time passed, slower than usual, as the atmosphere shifted, Tutien had arrived at the gate where Jack was being questioned. She couldn't go inside, had no permission to enter, no way to get closer. She could only stand there, outside, a distance so near, yet impossible to reach. She stood, without speaking, without calling out, without doing anything else, just waiting, not knowing how long, not knowing until when, not knowing if she would even be able to see him, but she still stood, not leaving, not changing, because she believed in one simple thing: as long as she was still here, as long as she did not leave, then Jack would not feel that he was alone. Time passed, slowly, but clearly. The sky grew darker, the light faded, streetlights began to turn on, one by one, casting light onto the empty space ahead. People passing by, gradually fewer, no longer crowded, no longer hurried footsteps. The space became quieter, wider, and emptier. Bút Tutien was still there, not leaving. In the dim light, her figure seemed smaller, as if being swallowed by the space. But her determination did not change, did not weaken, did not waver. And perhaps this was the moment, the most difficult. No longer about money, no longer about debts, no longer about work pressure, but standing before a very clear boundary between holding on and losing everything, losing a career, losing dignity, and possibly losing the future. Everything was facing a challenge. No one could predict the outcome. Would Jack be able to hold on amid the tightening spiral, day by day? Would Tutien's persistence, her choice to stay, be enough to keep him standing amid the growing storms? Or would everything truly collapse? Stay tuned for the next episode to find out what happens next. And don't forget to come back to my channel tomorrow.
Xin chào tất cả mọi người đã quay trở lại với kênh của mình nhé. Hôm nay thì mình mang đến cho mọi người một video về câu chuyện của Tử Tiên và Rắc nha mọi người. Cảm ơn mọi người rất là nhiều vì đã theo dõi và ủng hộ cho kênh của mình. Bây giờ thì mình đang làm video, mình vẫn chưa chọn được ảnh thumbnail là hợp lý. Ảnh thumb thì mình đã tạo rồi, nhưng mà tìm một cái ảnh mà nó hợp lý một tí, mình nghĩ là mình sẽ chọn ảnh này. Không giống mấy nhỉ. Cảm ơn mọi người rất nhiều, hy vọng rằng sẽ gặp ở trong các video tiếp theo nha. Ảnh này khuôn mặt không giống mấy. Tạm biệt mọi người, hẹn gặp lại mọi người nhé.